Well, girls get UTIs. What do we do for them? We give them antibiotics. We don't chop off parts of their bodies.
Once again, this is an uncommon condition. It occurs primarily in children who have other defects. It occurs in girls more than in boys. It is readily treatable by antibiotics within a day or two.
These are just the excuses. Every excuse, when one excuse is debunked, the next one comes along.
It's almost like there's a disease of the decade.
Name a decade, and there was some fear at work. Guess what the latest fear is these days? HIV.
So the only way to figure out whether, in this case, male circumcision was going to protect men was to do a randomized trial.
In this randomized trial, we identified HIV uninfected men, then we randomized them to either get circumcised immediately or delay circumcision for 2 years, and found that the circumcised men had 60% lower infection rates.
Those studies have really gotten legs. I mean, they were picked up in the popular press.
Those studies are the reason why the American Academy of Pediatrics released their 2012 circumcision policy statement.
It's the circumcision to prevent AIDS agenda with big, big bucks behind it.
If you're circumcised, your chance of AIDS is reduced by over 60%.
PEPFAR will provide $40 million to support circumcisions for almost 500,000 of boys and men.
All three of those studies have been contested for their statistical shortcuts.
So here's the results. The number of men who were circumcised who got infected after 12 months was 1.5% of the groups. And I've combined the stats to make it easy, but the studies were very similar. The intact, that is the men who were not circumcised, their infection rate was higher, 3.38% of the group. So the absolute risk reduction you could argue for circumcision is 1.8%. And this is the stat you should be reading in your newspaper, not the 53%, because that's the relative risk reduction comparing the two little groups. So one of the commonest errors in statistics is for people to jack up their results by talking about relative changes and not talking about absolute changes.
With respect to the other behaviors, such as condom use, men who consistently used condoms had lower rates of HIV. The problem is, with a behavior that requires long-term, lifelong adherence, you don't get the kind of compliance that would be ideal. So we were very much looking for other things that we could add into the prevention mix. So here we've got something that almost works like a vaccine.
They've said circumcision is like a highly effective vaccine. Now, the measles vaccine, right? You probably had that. 99% of the people who get the measles vaccine and its boosters become permanently immune to measles. That means you can have somebody with measles sneeze on you, cough on you, do whatever, and you won't get measles. That is what an effective vaccine looks like. Even if circumcision has some effective protection, it's not like a vaccine. If you have sex many times, you'll eventually get HIV.
It has already been noted in a couple of different African countries that men are lining up to get circumcision so they won't have to use condoms.
So even if there's a protective effect, I believe that will be completely swamped by people not using condoms, which are much more effective.
Well, certainly that was a concern we all had. It's what is known as risk compensation in the jargon. It means that if people believe that they're protected from a health risk, they're going to increase their risk behaviors. But we followed men in the trial, and we've now been following them for 4 years after the trial, and we see no evidence that they increase their risk behaviors.
Researchers have attempted to dispel this claim and did a study showing that, no, actually the men who are circumcised are more likely to use condoms.
If anything, what we're finding is that the men who choose not to come for circumcision have a higher risk profile. They tend to be the cowboys who don't take care of themselves and don't try to mitigate risk.
Well, if the men who are circumcised are more likely to use condoms, go back to those original 3 studies, isn't that what's preventing the HIV, that they're more likely to use condoms? Maybe.
All right, let's go through the flaws. Flaw 5, selection bias. Only men